Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do so very, very much appreciate you being with me. Let me ask you a favor, okay? Please subscribe to this channel. My subscriber list continues to grow. As I've said on many different occasions, I understand it's not, quote, viral. We're not getting 100,000 views, and unfortunately, I wish we were. I wish more and more and more people would have an interest in spiritual things. I would wish that more and more people would be concerned about the challenge of Christ. But the lamentable fact is, folks, far, far too many people are literally unaware of the challenge of Christ. One more time, let me remind you of what the challenge of Christ is. Jesus said, "Do not believe me for my word's sake. Believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." And this is so incredibly important. Why? Well, because as I've shared with you on many different occasions, the skeptical world, the atheist world, the anti-Christian world believes that Jesus did not do what he said he was going to do. Let me remind you, on October the 12th, which is only, a couple of weeks away now? Something like that. I'll be debating a world-renowned historian by the name of Richard Carrier. He is a scholar, no doubt, and I do appreciate scholarship. I don't appreciate his beliefs because I believe they're absolutely contrary to the truth. But nonetheless, Richard Carrier will be affirming that insofar as the Bible accurately records the words of Jesus, his predictions of his coming failed. Richard Carrier believes that Jesus lied or he failed. Now, this promises to be an incredible debate, ladies and gentlemen, and it's going to be a challenge. It may perhaps be the greatest debate challenge that I've ever had. And I've had, I don't even know how many debates I've had. I don't keep track of them, to be honest about it. But the point of fact is, even though I have debated other atheists, I have not debated atheists with his credentials and with his philosophical background. So this is going to be challenging, at least on one hand. But I believe that Dr. Carrier has completely and totally misconstrued the biblical story. So anyway, be looking for that debate. It will be carried on mythvision.com. There is an announcement of it on my website, donkpreston.com, and bibleprophecy.com. So keep track of the upcoming nature and how imminent it really is. It's not far off, folks. It's soon, and I don't mean in some elastic, plastic, silly, putty use of the word soon. It's coming soon. Okay. Hey, listen, don't forget, before I get into the video this morning, my absolutely fantastic 2-book special for the month of September 2024. My book, Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, a study of Israel's last feast day, Sukkot, and the doctrine of the resurrection. This book normally sells for $25.95 plus $7.95 shipping. If you purchase the 2-book special, all right, I'm going to throw in free of charge Can God Tell Time. That's $2.95 plus $4.95 shipping that I'm just giving you gratis. Okay, so go now. This offer is only good for the rest of September 2024, and that's U.S. orders only. Now, look, if you would like to purchase a PDF copy of my book, I will sell you a PDF copy under certain conditions and stipulations, but contact me and I'll be happy to work with you on that. Okay, well, I've been sharing with you how the challenge of Christ is met most effectively by realizing that the Bible never ever predicted the coming of Jesus out of heaven, visibly, audibly, in a physical body, or even the appearance of a physical body. This is, so far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest mistakes in the entirety of all Christian theology, and specifically, obviously, eschatology, in that, historically, beginning in the 2nd century, beginning almost immediately after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, but even impacting the early churches, false ideas about eschatology was the belief that Jesus promised to come back in a physical body, put an end to time, destroy the cosmos. That is a gross error. And I know I'm swimming against the tide. I know that 98, 99% of all of Christianity considers what I'm saying to you as heresy and false teaching. I understand that. Look, folks, I was raised in the futurist view. I was raised believing that the coming of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event. I'm a 5th-generation member of the Churches of Christ who believe that Christ comes at the end of time. I did not abandon those views lightly. I did not abandon and surrender those views without countless hours, days, weeks, months, even years of intensive study. But the scriptures forced me to re-examine that concept, that traditional view of eschatology. Now, am I saying that my years of research is itself a guarantee that I'm right? No, I'm not making that argument. What I am arguing is that sound hermeneutic, proper exegesis, good logic caused me to reject the traditional views. That's why I'm sharing what I believe with you here on Now TV, because I soon realized in my upbringing, I very quickly realized that to hold on to the traditional view of Christ's coming, in light of Jesus's emphatic, undeniable statements that he was going to come back in the 1st century in judgment, there was no harmony in there. There was no answering that. I tried to argue, well, you know, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years. God doesn't see time like we do. And I found out that doesn't work. It's a false argument. Listen, if you can say that when God says the day of the Lord is at hand, and you can argue, well, yeah, but one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, then you can likewise say 1,000 years is only a day. If not, why not? And furthermore, if you're going to make that argument in regard to God's statements about time, then how are you going to explain the fact that Jesus said the Son of Man will be crucified and buried, and after 3 days, he'll be raised again? Are you going to argue that 3 days is actually 3,000 years? If not, why not? When Jesus said, "My hour has come," did he even understand what he was saying? When John wrote, through inspiration of the Spirit, the feast of the Jews was at hand. Well, has that feast of the Jews not come to pass after 2,000 years? You see, folks, when we make bad arguments come back to bite us. And we have to be able to answer our own bad arguments. Okay, so with all of this said, I've been sharing with you over the last few weeks what I call the doctrine of the invisible Parousia. Keep in mind that Jesus said, the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father. Scholar after scholar after scholar after scholar tells us what he was saying is he was going to come in the same glory, in the same manner that the Father had come before. In John chapter 5, 21 and following, Jesus said, from henceforth the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all men might honor the Son as they honor the Father. The Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. Now look, folks, point number one. The Father had judged many, many, many times, right? All you have to do is go back to the Tanakh, that is the Old Testament, and you see how God had judged Egypt and Pathros and Cush and Tyre and Sidon and the 10 northern tribes of Israel and the 2 southern tribes of Israel. God had judged them. And how did he do it? Oh, he came on the clouds of heaven, Isaiah 19. He came with a shout in flaming fire, Jeremiah chapter 25. As Jeremiah foretold the imminent destruction of Jerusalem. I'll get that right in a minute. And he said, behold, the Lord comes out of Zion with a shout. Matter of fact, I think I've got my Bible open to that text. I've been looking at it all over again, after reading it and studying it years ago. But the Lord said he was going to come out of Zion. And here it is in Jeremiah chapter 25, 30 and following. Therefore you shall prophesy against all of them, against them with all of these words, and you shall say to them, the Lord will roar from Zion. He will roar from on high, utter his voice from his holy habitation. He will roar mightily against his fold, against all the inhabitants of the earth. A clamor has come to the end of the earth because the Lord has a controversy with the nations. He is entering into judgment with all flesh. As for the wicked, he has given them to the sword, declares the Lord. The Lord was coming in judgment. He was coming with a shout. He was coming with a roar out of heaven. Now, here's the fascinating thing about this, ladies and gentlemen. Jeremiah says that against this judgment, this day of the Lord, this coming of the Lord, was going to be against all the nations of the earth. And yet in the earlier part of the chapter, a list of those nations is given. Here's what we find as we look at the earlier part of the chapter. Let's see. We begin with verse 19. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, his servants, his princes, and all his people. Pardon me. And all the foreign people, all the kings of the land of Uz, all the kings of the land of the Philistines, even Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and the remnant of Ashdod, Edom, Moab, the sons of Ammon, all the kings of Tyre, all the kings of Sidon, and the kings of the coastlands which are beyond the sea, and Dedan, Tema, Buz, and all who cut the corners of the beard, all the kings of Arabia, all the kings of the foreign people who dwell in the desert, all the kings of Zimri, all the kings of Elam, all the kings of Media, and all the kings of the north, far and near, one with another, and all the kingdoms of the earth which are upon the face of the ground, and the king of Seshosh shall drink after them. All the nations of the earth. But wait a minute. They were going to be destroyed, as the very first part of the chapter proves, not only at this day of the Lord, but more specifically, they were going to be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. You know, folks, we've got a problem here. So many people read the scriptures and they see the terminology of all the nations of the earth. In fact, my opponent, Richard Carrier, is guilty of this. They see that terminology and they say, oh, that's the globe. That's every nation on the face of the earth from a modern cosmology, from a modern perspective of all the nations. And they go, well, look, God hasn't come in judgment of Russia or China or America. Just the other day, ladies and gentlemen, I was watching a YouTube video. I couldn't stand it, to be really bluntly honest about it. It was a video by Jonathan Cahn, who is a major false prophet in our modern world. But he says America is in the prophecies of the Old Testament. Well, part of the reason for that is, well, look, God predicted judgment on every nation on the face of the earth. Well, likewise, when we fail to understand, they were talking about their known world. And this list of nations here in Jeremiah chapter 25, 8 and following proves it. Guess what's missing from the text? Oh, Russia, China, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, America. Now, why would Jeremiah mention all of the nations of the earth of his day and of his time and of his world and omit nations that are exponentially greater than them from a modern perspective? Why didn't Jeremiah, more properly, why didn't God say, and in addition to these nations that I've named here, there are other nations in the far off future that I'm going to judge them as well when I come out of Zion? He could have said that, but he didn't. And the fact that he is concerned with his, quote, local cosmology, the fact that he is concerned with his world, his day, his time, the fact that he is concerned with Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Babylonians, as the instrument of God's wrath. Nebuchadnezzar, the one in whose hand Yahweh had put his, God's sword, as I explained in last week's program, demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that when you have these modern day prognosticators jumping up and saying, look, we find this language, every nation under heaven. It is a massive exegetical and hermeneutical fallacy to say, oh, well, yeah, that's talking about our day, pardon me, and our time, even though none of our modern nations are listed. Let me give you another example here of realizing and having to honor the fact that the ancient people used, quote, universal language when, in fact, they had no knowledge of the globe. They had no knowledge of the modern nations that exist today. they were speaking of their day and of their time and of their world. And again, here's a classic example of it. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar had conquered basically the known world. By this time, he had already conquered virtually every one of these nations mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 25. For instance, in 583 BC, just 3 years after the fall of Jerusalem, he destroyed Edom. That's what the book of Obadiah was about, when Obadiah said, the day of the Lord is at hand on all the nations. All the nations? Yeah. And in 583 BC, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Edom. And I know that because the book of Malachi chapter 1, 2, and 3, looks back on the destruction of Edom as a past event. Yet Obadiah said the destruction of Edom would take place at the day of the Lord. So once again, when people say, well, the day of the Lord, that's the earth-burning, time-ending event. Or when they say, well, yes, there are localized days of the Lord, but that means you've got localized days of the Lord that use the language of the judgment of every nation under heaven. And then you've got supposedly this other day of the Lord that may not mention these specific nations by name or specifically. And so the argument is, well, since there's no qualification over here, then it must be a literal cosmic event. And the question there becomes, what's your rule of hermeneutic here? Who says so? That's an argument that skeptics like to make to justify rejecting Jesus as the Son of God. Okay, back to Daniel chapter 4. So here is Nebuchadnezzar. He has essentially conquered all of the people listed in Jeremiah chapter 25. And by the way, Ezekiel chapter 25 is a parallel text. Jeremiah and Ezekiel were contemporaries, of course, as they were with Daniel. So here is Nebuchadnezzar. And he walks out on the porch, probably, of his incredibly wonderful and beautiful palace. And he surveys this marvelous city of Babylon, who historians tell us the walls, and I don't want to diverge too much on this, but I absolutely love this history. The walls of Babylon were wide enough so that 4 chariots could have a race on top of the walls. Those walls were supposedly 100 feet tall. And again, wide enough for 4 chariots to race on. Babylon was considered absolutely impregnable, unconquerable. So anyway, it's totally fascinating. So here you have Nebuchadnezzar. He walks out and he considers, behold the works of my hand. God has given me sovereignty. He has given me the rule and the kingdom over every nation under heaven. Pardon me. Everywhere the birds fly, everywhere under heaven has been given to me. Now, let's see here. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, and here's the point about the invisible Parousia. Here is Nebuchadnezzar rejoicing over having destroyed all of these nations listed in Jeremiah 25 and Ezekiel 25. But here's what you got to catch. The destruction of those nations was going to take place at the day of the Lord. It was going to take place when the Lord would roar out of heaven. He would roar out of his holy place. and he would destroy those nations at the day of the Lord. Well, okay, if the day of the Lord is, earth-burning, time-ending event, then how could Nebuchadnezzar, after he had conquered these nations, walk out on his porch and say, I've already done it? I've destroyed all these nations. I've conquered every nation under heaven. You see a problem here? What we have here is an invisible parousia. Let me make this very quick observation. I'm running out of time very quickly here. What we have in the Old Testament, as I pointed out before, is we have the use of a word in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. We have a word that is prosopon. As I pointed out last week, prosopon literally means nose, it means face, and it means presence. Okay, prosopon is used literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in the Old Testament to speak of the presence of the Lord at the day of the Lord. Do you see a train coming? In his prediction of the destruction of all of these nations, that was going to be the presence, the face of the Lord at the day of the Lord. But let me reiterate this. Nebuchadnezzar said he had accomplished that destruction, which means the day of the Lord, the parousia / prosopon of the Lord had occurred. Did anyone see Yahweh coming out of heaven, literally, visibly, bodily, and say, oh, look, that's God coming out of Zion? No. Did anyone hear the literal voice of Yahweh screaming, yelling out of literal heaven? No, they did not. But it was the parousia, the invisible parousia. I'm out of time. See you next week.